Hi everybody, good evening. Good to see you all. Thanks, Rebecca. Um, I hope everyone is keeping really safe and well during these extraordinary times, and I hope you all manage to have a peaceful and happy Christmas. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to be collaborating with ArtLink for the first time, working on this new partnership in support of the event this evening, and also to be supporting Tristan's work, following being involved from the earliest days in the Invisible in Between, mentoring, but also through the East Meets West masterclasses with format. So my name is Nicola Shipley and I'm the Director of Grain Projects. Stephen Burke, my colleague, is also with us this evening. We're based in Birmingham in the UK. We're supported by Arts Council England and Birmingham City University. And we commission contemporary photography. We provide a platform for practitioners. We run a bespoke professional development program, which is a national program, and we also curate and publish new work. Really looking forward to this talk this evening. As I said, it's great to be involved. It's a momentous time, it's a historical occasion, and it's been a really extraordinary year. So thanks again, and yeah, back to you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Lovely to be working with you. As Nicola says, so we're joined this evening by Tristan Poyser, and in conversation with Jackie Reid was the intention. But as I mentioned earlier, we're just a wee bit having a few connectivity problems. So Jackie will hopefully join us as much as possible. Tristan is a photographer and a board member of the Arts Council of England sector support organisation Red Eye, the Photography Network, a tutor at the British Academy of Photography, and a guest lecturer on professional practice, and delivers participatory workshops. He's also judged for the RIBA Awards. And this evening he is going to talk to us about two of his projects, which collectively are called A Time of Uncertainty. The first project, The Invisible in Between, an Englishman's search for the Irish border. So he'll talk through that first. And then he'll go on to talk about Masked, a portrait of Amazon, which kind of is a performative portraits based on his time working at Amazon during lockdown. So we are going to begin the presentation now. So if I ask you to turn off your videos at this point. If you have any questions for Tristan about any aspect of the project, you can ask them in the chat box during the talk. And if they could be things that you just want him to clarify about the project, and he said he's quite happy to address those during the talk, or at the end you can actually interact with the artist directly and have a conversation. So without further ado, we will just I'm going to pass you on to Tristan.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us. I'd like to say a big thank you to Martha and Rebecca from ArtLink, and to Nicola and Stephen from Grain Projects for supporting me in this talk. I was going to say a bit more about both of them, but I think they've already covered that. So I'm going to start. I'll share my screen now. Okay, so A Time of Uncertainty brings together two projects that I've been working on for the last 4 years. The first project is The Invisible in Between, an Englishman's search for the Irish border. That first was instigated by the whole Brexit referendum, which happened back in 2016. What I'll do is I'll talk to you a bit about each project came about, my approach, the evolution and the participation elements, And again, as Rebecca mentioned, if you've got any questions, please put them into the chat box. So the invisible in between, it was a response to the UK referendum results. When the referendum result was initially announced, my first thought was the Irish border. I don't have any Irish heritage or connection with Ireland, but as it being the only UK border, I wondered how they could let members of the public make a vote that would impact that. It was also, so the first thing that I wanted to do was find out more about the border so I could educate myself. It also turned into a way of exploring my own English identity. As a result of the referendum, I spoke to my friends, family and peers who seemed quite oblivious to the impact it could have on the border and the rest of the UK and our relationship with the EU, especially seeing as my family have a holiday home in France, my cousin lives in Germany, so it seemed very strange that a lot of them voted to leave. So my initial thing to do was a bit more research, and I arranged a workshop with secondary school children in Fred Longsworth Secondary School to find out what they knew about the Irish border, the history of it, what they knew about Brexit, and how they thought it could impact their future. And it became quickly apparent that they had no awareness at all of the history of the border. They knew nothing about Brexit or how it could impact their future. So it was really this that made me determined to go and explore the border for myself, so that I could create a project which I could bring back to the UK, especially England, to try and make people think about their actions and the consequences of those. And I specifically titled the project An Englishman's Search for the Irish Border, because it was about my own English identity and reaching out to those people who were English and had felt the need to be English or have a sense of pride in their Englishness, which can be quite difficult sometimes. So the aims and objectives of the project were to document the whole of the 310-mile border on the island of Ireland during the proposed 2-year period of uncertainty, which was between Article 50 being invoked and leaving the EU. Now, obviously, it's gone on a bit longer than we all expected and taken more than 2 years, which has been great for the project. It was to educate myself about the physicality of the border, the people that live there and the communities, and the impact that the referendum could have on them. And then it was, as I mentioned before, to present the work to the UK public, inviting them to consider how the impact of this referendum vote affected those people living on the border and would impact their future. And I wanted to create a project that was accessible to everybody and could be understood by my mum or my relatives who aren't in the contemporary art world, as well as being a project which would fit into that contemporary photography world. So the first thing that I did after doing the work at the school was to contact Irish writers and academics who were born on or near the border, so that I could have some reference, I suppose, and get some first-hand knowledge about what it was like to be on the border. I was very lucky that Jackie, who's with us tonight, was one of those creatives. I spent 2 days with Jackie walking the border. Another was Garrett Carr, who wrote a book about his experience of walking the border over 8 years. And then there was Conor O'Callaghan, another Irish academic and writer who was born on the border, and I spent 2 days walking with him. And that time spent with each of them was invaluable to give me a real insight in what it was like living in the border, and especially growing up there over the last 30, 40 years, and the duality that comes with growing up on the border, which I wouldn't have been able to understand or even have any type of insight into without speaking to them. So I started visiting the border it was March 2017, and initially just to document the border as it was do recce's and explore it. An early issue was how to explain where the border was within the pictures, because it was invisible. There was no real way to show how the border wound its way across the landscape. And so that's where the tear came in, and that was an early solution to make the invisible visible. I then decided that I wanted it to be a participatory project and started to ask people to tear photographs themselves, so that they would get a sense of this irreversible action, and it was a way of transferring my own feelings of discomfort about the referendum, about Brexit, and the discomfort of walking along the Irish border as an Englishman. Often I was trespassing, trying to follow the border itself rather than going on the nearest road. I'd get stopped by people all the time questioning what I was doing there, why I was photographing the border. And so by asking people to tear a photograph, which is inherently wrong to me, a bit like breaking the spine on a book, it passed this feeling of discomfort that I felt working on the project. And also when you're creating that emotive action and then asking them to comment as well, it adds something and gets them in a certain frame of mind when they're commenting about how they feel about the period of uncertainty. And also it's a destructive act which can't be undone, and it's very simple, a bit like making a vote. So there are all of these, I suppose, symbolic elements to the tear, which I felt were important for people to experience. And moving on from just tearing the picture to actually commenting was a huge leap of evolution to the project. And that happened when I was taking part in Grain Project's East Meets West professional development workshop. And there were a couple of photographers who were mentors there that really helped bring that on and really told me off for not documenting what people were thinking about the border. And so it was Natasha Caruana who really made me see that. Also Anthony Lavera was one of those mentors as well, and his work involves people commenting around the photographs. And so really it was those two photographers that had a huge influence on helping me bring the project forward. So I think what I'd like to do now, having given everybody a quick introduction to the project, is that for those people that have been able to, or that have received their participation packs, it would be great if we could get those out now and do the tearing. So I'll stop sharing my screen and talk you through what we're going to do that with those packs, if that's okay. So if we could just have everyone's videos on for me. I'm hoping, there we go, wonderful. Excellent. So hopefully you can all see me now. Just nod if you can. Wonderful. So there's no pressure, but you can only do this once. If everybody can get their packs out, you should have received a covering letter with a piece written about the project by Luke Das, who's with us tonight. So thank you very much for that, Luke. And in there you should have a piece of cream line coloured paper. Just put that to one side. Now, and then you have your photograph. So the instructions are on the back of the introduction letter. So if you feel more comfortable doing this in your own time, then you're welcome to. But if you're happy just to participate all together and tear your picture in front of the camera, then that's also welcome as well. So basically, what I've asked over 500 people that have participated so far to do is to tear the photograph along where they feel the border appears within the picture. Okay, so if you have a look at your picture for a couple of minutes, well, sorry, not minutes, let's go for seconds, and then think where you think the border may be within it, and then tear that photograph. Once you've torn it, I'll ask you to, you'll have to provide your own glue, I'm afraid, but you'll stick the photograph to the cream paper And then after the end of the talk, you can write your comment about how you feel about this time of uncertainty, because I don't think that uncertainty is by any means over yet. So if you're happy to tear it, please hold it up in front of the camera, and it should feel very wrong, and then just tear that photograph. I still find it quite discomforting to do it. I hope you all do too. Fantastic. I can see some people concentrating more than others. They must care more. Fantastic. And then if you can, once you've stuck it to the paper, written your comments, if you can just put your first name and where you're from to add some context to it, and then pop it back in the self-addressed envelope. There should be a stamp on there as well, and post it back to me. Then I'll scan them and add them to the rest of the collection. If you're interested in seeing all of the 500 plus participation pages that people have done over the last 4 years, then if you go to www.tristanpoyser.com, in the projects under the invisible in between, then all 500 that have been scanned are there, set out in the 7 books that have been created so far. So you're welcome to go and have a look at those as and when. Brilliant. And yes, those that haven't received packs, if you're in the Republic of Ireland, I'm going to blame the English Postal Service, so I apologise for that. If you were a late signee, then what we're going to do is we're going to send you a participation pack anyway, so that'll hopefully arrive in the next week or so. So fill that out in your own time and post it back, and we'll ensure that it's added to the project. Brilliant. Right, I'm going to crack on and start doing a brief overview, or bring into the next project, if that's okay. So if you could all switch your videos off for me, then I'll start again. So just to talk you through what you've been looking at so far. So far you've seen a selection of images which have been torn by myself, and they depict the actual border. And then following on from that are some of the participation pages of that same image. So here you're looking at Torn Town in Pettigo, where this gentleman said that they feel like shredding as immigrants, simultaneously taking your job whilst claiming your benefits. The project became initially, well, and still is, it was about an excuse for me to wander the Irish landscape and explore it, and fulfill my need for nature and to get out there. Looking at, I suppose, my own identity and the identity of the UK and the impact that Brexit was having on it. But it became much more about the participation element and documenting what people feel about it and creating a different narrative to that of the media or politicians. And more it's become about that. I asked people to participate wherever I went. So I started off carrying the book around, the same book that I took the pages out for you to use. I'd take it with me if I went on the train, an aeroplane. I'd target the person sitting next to me and ask them to participate. When I went to Germany to visit relatives, I took it there with me. And so slowly and slowly I build up the participants from a broad, I suppose, range of areas and different demographics. The other way that I accrued participants was every time I've exhibited the work, I've also had a participation book there. So when it was in Belfast, in Hull, in Liverpool, everywhere I've been. So, and that's really added to the project. And I suppose this part as well, because it's difficult for those visiting the exhibition in Fort Dunleary because of COVID restrictions, we can't have a book out there. So by having this participatory talk now, it's allowing me to add to this, I suppose, exhibition of the project. So thank you very much for participating. So when we first spoke about exhibiting with Fort Dunree, it was going to be just about the invisible in between. And as things got postponed because of the year we've had, it was Martha and Rebecca's idea potentially to bring in the second project that I've been working on in the last 6 or 7 months, because it's so pertinent to the border as it is at the moment. Now, I'm in Manchester, so I can't talk about this firsthand, but Martha and Rebecca, and I suppose those of you that are in Ireland at the moment, especially near the border, will understand how the COVID pandemic's had such an impact on the border and made that invisible line a lot more solid. I was speaking to Jackie just before Christmas, and she talked to me about having the Garda sat on the border, which must be the first time that you've had border posts for a long period of time. So this whole pandemic has, on top of Brexit, has had an even bigger impact, more so than that we would have known when we first started speaking about Brexit. And it was for this reason that they asked me to combine the exhibition to include Masked, a Portrait of Amazon. So I'll just briefly talk you through how that came about. It wasn't an intentional project that I started looking to make, but back in March, when just before the first lockdown, I started getting my commercial commissions cancelled, which is how I pay to or fund the projects that you're seeing now. And I made the tough decision that after 17 years of being a self-employed photographer, that I would try and get a job at the local Amazon warehouse, so that I could have some, I say, certainty. My wife was on maternity leave and didn't have a job to go back to, and my work was disappearing. So I made the decision to apply for a job at Amazon. And for me, that it was, I suppose I was very torn emotionally about that. There was all the unknowns about COVID. We didn't know what was happening with it at the time, or how serious it was. And so deciding to put myself in a situation where I'd be working with lots of other people, handling lots of packages, I wasn't 100% comfortable with it, and neither was my wife, and the thought of putting my children at risk. So it was quite a big decision to make. The positives were that because of the COVID incentive, it equated to 27 grand a year. And so there was that financial incentive to do that, and it would mean that I wouldn't be eating into my savings. So I decided to take the job. And fortunately, after 2 weeks, I was approached by Historic England to make work for a commission about documenting a week of my lockdown experience. And as somebody that's used to, I suppose, trying to make the most of every opportunity, that was a perfect way for me to try and get into Amazon to take pictures. Having worked there for 2 weeks inside, it was like nothing I'd experienced, just the scale, the automation of it. And I just wanted to photograph in there. So as soon as I was offered this commission by Tamsin Sylvie, Historic England, I started stalking people on Amazon through LinkedIn, asking them if I could come in and make portraits of staff. So luckily, having Historic England as the commissioner helped, and Amazon let me start making work there. So initially, I started making portraits of people for the last hour of my shift, and they let me make pictures continually for the last hour of every shift, and pretty much gave me free reign of the whole building, all 3 floors. Sometimes my boss, when I wasn't packing or moving pallets, would say, "Oh, Tristan, have 2 hours, we're not very busy," you know. They really supported that. Initially, they wanted to see the pictures that I was making, and especially those before that were going to be submitted to the Historic England archive, but they soon realised that it wasn't a commercial project. It was a contemporary arts project, and so they weren't bothered about you know, what I was submitting. They trusted me that I wasn't going to be creating anything that would be detrimental to them. And to be fair to them, nobody that I spoke to or any of the people that I asked to comment or have their portrait taken had anything bad to say about Amazon. There's lots of stuff you read in the press, and for me, I didn't experience any of that. I don't know if it's just in America, but for me, the safety conditions there because of COVID were fantastic. The only issue was the people that worked there and them having the common sense to follow the safety guidelines that were put in, to the point that you'd have managers directing people and telling them and enforcing them all the time. So everybody that I spoke to and asked to comment was really positive about the project and really positive about working at Amazon, because it provided an opportunity for them to earn money in a really difficult time. And a lot of the people as well came from varying nationalities. There were of the 130 people that I made portraits of, I photographed 20 different nationalities, and all of them had an interesting story to tell. Most of them sad, unfortunately, about not being able to go to the scans of babies, expecting their wives to come over from their home countries after 4 years, but the flights being postponed because of COVID. The gentleman you can see on screen now, unfortunately, Gary's deaf, and he really struggles to communicate. The lip reading he can do, he couldn't do very well because of the masks. He lived with his mother, but unfortunately she died as a result of COVID. So there were all these stories which I wasn't expecting to hear, and made it really, I suppose, an emotional project. Once I stayed at Amazon for 5 months, and I handed my notice in once my wife came off maternity and found employment, and so I took a large part in childcare. Nights just wasn't conducive, unfortunately, to continuing working there. But the project still continued through the performative portraits and the still life work that interspersed between the portraits that you can see at the moment. And these really are a reflection of how I felt about the pandemic, my time at Amazon, and just that emotional uncertainty that I felt. It's an area of photography that I've not really done before, especially not for my personal work. And it builds on my experience learning photography through biological photography, which I did a master's in. So it uses a technique called dark field illumination. Because for me, I suppose the COVID is a very biological thing. I feel fortunate that my background in biology has given me an insight into the virus and more of an understanding of it, which a lot of people may not have. I wanted to lend this to the work as well. I was also influenced by Mandy Barker's work of photographing plastic, which I've seen quite a lot of recently. So all of these different things fed into those pictures. Also, you will have seen the 64 mask portrait, where I have a self-portrait wearing every single mask that I wore whilst at Amazon. And there's also one of my daughter, Amira, who's 5, wearing all of those masks. The reason that I did that is, one, because she asked if she could do it. And it was a way of, I suppose, talking through COVID with her and bring her into the experience. For her, she always knew Daddy as a photographer, not somebody that works at Amazon, and not who works at night. So it's, the whole pandemic has been very difficult for her to understand, and to understand why she can't go to school, why she can't see her friends. And so bringing her into the project in that way, for me, felt like a very natural thing. And also it's an emotive thing. As soon as people see small children, it raises lots of questions. And then also there's a representation, and I say representation, of my 13-month-old, or he was at the time, 13-month-old son, wearing all 64 masks as well. He spent more than half his life in lockdown now, and who knows how that will impact him. He's not been able to go to the various baby groups or the different medical assessments that my daughter would have done. So Also here showing now is a water bottle that was decorated by my daughter. Once she joined Amazon, everyone was given a generic water bottle, and it's very easy to get lost. So my daughter decorated mine for me. So they're a large part of the pandemic for me and my life. So for me, it made sense that they be included in that. It was quite nice as well for me to be able to bring the participatory part of my practice into this project and follow it on from the invisible in between. For me, the participatory element is really important in creating this social documentary project, which is going to create hopefully a lasting legacy and a narrative from real people. And also it makes it more accessible by the general public. And so those are the two main reasons why I like to make it a part of my work. I'd hope that I've given a good introduction to both of those projects. So I'm going to turn off the slideshow now and then invite Jackie to ask me a few questions.
Hi, Tristan. Yes, and hello, everyone else. I'm still here as well, but it may cut out from time to time. I guess, Tristan, as a photographer, I met you back at an exhibition and got talking to you, and that's how come I learned about your project. And living like so close to the border myself, I'm from Donegal, but Derry's only like 5 minutes away. It's my nearest town, so it's natural for me to pop to Derry across the border rather than go to Letterkenny and Donegal. So, but when I went, I joined you then for a day, and you were shooting analog, you were shooting film rather than digital for your project. As a photographer, I just find that really interesting because, you know, it's all about technology and everything nowadays. So I just was wondering, I guess, that your reasoning and your thought process behind using film for the project.
Yeah, I suppose other than the 5 months working at Amazon, I'm a photographer full time and have been for the last 17 years. So with the project, it was because it was self-determined, self-funded. Really, it's all about me doing what I wanted to do in my own time. It was only self-funded, not for lack of trying, but because it was all about me. If I went out and did it digitally, the amount of just the workflow and the way that I would shoot would create so many pictures is one reason. Also, I'm neurodiverse, I've got ADHD, so my brain's all over the place all the time. And by shooting analog, I really have to focus and concentrate on what I'm doing so that I don't, double expose one of the dark slides on the 5.4, which, I inevitably do, unfortunately, especially if someone starts talking to me as I'm doing it. So by leaving my digital camera at home, and just going there with my 5.4 and the medium format, it meant that I might take 4 or 5 pictures in a day. If I was feeling really extravagant, it might be 10. And just my appreciation of what I was doing and the cost financially that it takes and the time that it takes adds a lot more value to the process to me, and hopefully to the work as well. There is that aesthetic quality to it, which I don't think that you will have from digital or that people may try and replicate. It also, in one way, simplifies the workflow, because I'll take the picture, I'll get the picture developed and scanned, and then I'm not going to start photoshopping it or worrying about the color or this, that and the other. Obviously there's a scanning element to it which adds a layer, and me deciding to create archival prints and then tear them adds another layer of complexity, and then having to scan those to then show them digitally, I hadn't foreseen. But intrinsically, it's about having simplicity and me really scaling back my process and just being able to be in the moment, enjoying the landscape and not worrying about technology.
Yeah. Thank you. You were talking as well, whenever you were interviewed, I think it was for the Belfast exhibition, about how you used the facilities. You did a residency, I believe, in the Gallery of Photography in Dublin, and then you did some work on the project in Belfast, and then there was a contributor in England in that, and you're exhibiting in cross-border in Donegal now. So like the project itself has taken on its own form through your contacts and what you've used to bring it to fruition as well.
I suppose I've just been really fortunate in that regards. Initially, I set out to make the project for English people. I don't want to tell Irish people about their own border. I obviously always wanted to exhibit it in the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, or as many places as possible. But one thing I did do is every time I planned my trips over to Ireland, I made sure they coincided with the Belfast Photography Festival or the Dublin Photography Festival. And I was very fortunate that I managed, not on purposely, but I coincided with the Remote Photography Festival where we met.
Yes.
And that was all about the border. When I was there, I met Tristan and her partner, who's, my brain's gone, I apologise, who's a well-respected photographer in his own right. And he invited me to come and visit him next time I was on the board. And I didn't realise that he was Trisha's partner. Sorry, Trish Lamb's one of the directors at the Gallery of Photography in Dublin. So when I went to visit her partner, whose name I can't remember, I apologise, I met Trish as well, and she, I suppose, offered me support and said, look, if you want to use, I was talking about scanning and things, and I didn't know that they had the facilities, but she said, if you want, we'll be able to offer you a short-term artist residency to scan your pictures and train you on the Hasselblad scanner. So that was absolutely fantastic. With Belfast Exposed Gallery, I suppose because I'm cheeky, I went in there one day, well, so I was in Belfast, and knocked on the office doors and asked them if they could tear some pictures and participate in the project, which I suppose gave me an introduction, and they said that they'd be happy to exhibit it and asked if I'd become a futures artist. So really, I suppose, because I've been asking people to participate and tear pictures, it's allowed me to go up to anybody within the photography industry with a reason to speak to them and to introduce the project to them, which has, you know, paid off.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, no, I just thought it was really interesting the way that they all evolved and came together under the one project. The other thing as well, I was wondering, because we spent that time out along the border, but whenever you were out yourself, did you get a different sense between the people that you spoke to who live along the border and then people's feelings about it, say like in Belfast or that, you know, city people, and then with regards in English people, or when you were in Germany?
I think people along the border just seemed a bit, that they'd meet me and they'd ask me what I was doing, and I'd say I'm taking pictures of the border, and they'd ask who for, and I'd say for myself, and they didn't quite understand why I was doing that. And then asking them to tear a picture as well. It took a while for me to explain why I was doing it, and they still weren't too sure why I, as an Englishman, was interested in the border that they lived on. I think in the towns, so in Belfast and Dublin or elsewhere, people obviously were a lot more disengaged from the whole, from the issues surrounding the border, and then it was, I suppose, people were passionate about it, more dependent on their political views and whether they were ardent liberals or ardent, you know, and Remainers, are ardent leavers and more right wing. So I think those that were more interested were those that were more passionate about their politics necessarily than where I actually met people, if that makes sense.
Hmm. And I just was wondering as well, with Brexit and that now, that has obviously happened now because it was in the process whenever you were doing the project, do you feel that the border, where at one time it would have been a more religious political thing, has kind of moved on now to a more political aspect, if you know what I mean? You know, with regards to politics between separating from Europe, that it has grown and it's, whereas before it was something that was quite colonial to the area, to the counties, to the island of Ireland, whereas now the border and Brexit, you know, it's discussed in Europe. You know, it was one of the big things in Brexit, our little line that divides this country.
I suppose
the invisible line.
My approach coming into the project was one where I'm absolutely clueless about the border. I'm clueless about the religious division and the politics. And because I have no authority, I've done no research on it that would make me an expert. But from growing up and being aware of the border on the news all through the 90s, obviously the religious element and division was the main thing that people spoke about. It was always about Protestants and Catholics, whereas I think since the last 4 years that you don't hear that mentioned at all, really, or I don't, or I'm not aware of it as I was growing up. It is now about politics through and through, what the DUP are doing or what Sinn Féin are doing because of Brexit, not because of any other reason.
Okay, thank you, Tristan.
Thank you, Chad.
I think, Rebecca, that's all I have to kind of grill Tristan on.
No, that was very interesting, and yeah, thank you. I mean, it was because of your conversation with Tristan that this has all come about. So it's really interesting how these things evolve. I invite everybody to, if they would like to, they can put on their videos. I'll just remind people again that this has been recorded. So if you don't want to have your video on, that's fine too. During your talk, there were a few questions, Tristan, or at least a few comments as well. I asked people how they felt about tearing the photograph as well. So some really nice.
Work my way through some of those questions.
Yeah, should we do that? A lot of them are comments about the tearing thing. There was somebody asked about, had you heard about the Yellow Line project by Suzanne Lacey?
Yes, I was lucky. I mentioned whilst I was over, I was lucky enough to go to the Remote Photography Festival up in Letterkenny, and Suzanne Lacey was there at that. So I was aware of the project. Also, Garrett Carr, who I met with a few times to talk about the border. He participated and worked with Suzanne on the Yellow Line. So one, I suppose, nice thing about working on the border is that I've got to know lots of other artists and projects that have been working in around Brexit and the border, which has been really interesting.
The rest of the comments are comments, but I would like to kind of hand over to Martha McCullough, who is the project coordinator at ArtLink, like myself, but is actually a photographer herself, unlike myself, who's just winging it. So I'm just going to pass on to Martha, who has more kind of a better understanding of photography and that field. So I'm going to pass on to you, Martha.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite interested in just that notion. Like, I don't know if people quite understand just the impact of a photographer like you, Tristan, like destroying a picture, and how difficult that is, how, you know, because obviously your approach to photography is, it's quite classical, it's quite formal. So that idea of you know, embarking on that destructive process must have been like really hard, you know.
Yeah, it was difficult, and I think what made it even harder was because I I knew I was going to tear the photographs. I didn't want to cut any corners. And because I was able to use the Rolls Royce of scanners, the Hasselblad Flexitite at the Gallery of Photography in Dublin, I didn't want to do them a disservice. So I did scan them properly as if they were going to be, well, they are archival prints. And then each one I'd spend 1 to 2 hours spotting them to make sure that they're pristine and didn't have dust marks on. And so then having to tear them and knowing that if I got the tear wrong or didn't do it how I wanted to do it, because I can be very particular. So if I miss the area that I want to tear, or I tear something that's on the wrong side of the border, if that makes sense, such as a tree or a post, then I can't go back, because the tear's supposed to be one tear and it's irreversible, like your vote for Brexit. So there were all these layers which made it even more difficult. And then the size, even though they're only, I suppose, just 30-inch prints, 30 centimeter prints, the how you can manipulate them to tear, to follow the border, makes it harder. So all of those things made it more difficult for me. But when it came to, I suppose, the initial idea of tearing it, I knew that I suggested it to my wife, and she said, "You can't do that. You'd never tear a picture. That's not what you do." And so, sorry for the bad impression. But so as soon as she said that and had that reaction, for me, that was, you know, a way. I decided that's what I was going to do to make the invisible visible. I'd thought about using a pen or drawing or various other ways, but I think for the emotive nature of the tear and what everyone's been through over this, you know, last 4 years, it fits well.
But it's that idea that once it's torn, there's no going back, you know, that's it, you know, that simple gesture, I think, because marking a surface isn't the same as, I suppose it kind of is reminiscent of the idea that when relationships break, that photographs are torn and people are torn away from a group photograph and things like that. So we're aware of how it exists in kind of vernacular photography. So again, I keep just coming back to the idea that in some ways it is so simple, but so kind of profound, that idea. And that, you know, it's just a very visceral kind of thing. And I'm interested in the idea as well as the whole project started with you working with these school kids and thinking, you know, the project's come a long way since then. Have you thought about the idea, would you go back to the schools? Would you, because I mean, as you say, this process hasn't ended, it's only just begun, this whole Brexit nonsense. And like, what is there, do you foresee that as being something evolving the project by partly going back to those school kids or other school kids?
I'm always interested in going into schools and working with young people in and around photography. Unfortunately, those school children are no longer school children. It's taken that long. Yeah. With regards to, I suppose, evolving, I started just before lockdown. I started doing recce's of the Scottish border, and I'm fortunate that in January I'll be starting teaching 2 days a week at Cumbria University, which is in Carlisle, and so that will allow me to, I think I should be there every other week, so that will allow me to be close to the Scottish border and to spend the next year hopefully making work there. So in a continuation of exploring borders physically and getting me outside in the fresh air, but also exploring I suppose my identity and the identity of us as the UK. And obviously there's always going to be questions about Scottish independence, the impact of Brexit on Scotland, the fact that they didn't want to leave the EU. So I think that's in my mind, I'd love to be able to complete the Scottish border and the Welsh border, and then see what I've got at the end of that.
But it's interesting actually, because Siba Chowdhury, she's asking about that, about if you had any plans for continuing the project, is there a way of covering more borders? But the one thing, right, as a Scottish person with Scottish Irish ancestry, my mum's Irish, my dad was Scottish Irish. This whole idea, like when sometimes I listen to, you know, even like comedy panel shows on the TV, and you hear people making comments that kind of go, oh, aye, everybody's going to be like the north of England are going to be wanting to be separated off, and as if somehow there's a lack of understanding of the difference between a kind of national identity in a way, or cultural identity, and a regional identity, and the idea that Scotland actually was a separate country for a long time, but also that there's a difference between an island of Ireland, which was one country and was split by the border, and you know, Wales and Scotland that were separate countries. Do you know what I mean? Like the border is very different here, because the border fractured Ireland. The border didn't fracture Scotland or Wales. You know, it's a, yeah, it's a big subject, and it's a very different kind of subject, I think.
I think one of the things I realised very early on was that, and one of the reasons I went into the school to speak to the children and wanted to do the project in the first place, was that so many people, even after the referendum results, were so blinkered, and unless they experienced something themselves by growing up on a border or by being Scottish, when you, again, I can only talk from my own experience and those people around me, but you don't have an awareness of what it's like to be Scottish or Irish living on a border and having this duality. And so the aim of the project initially was to make people aware of the impact of their actions on others. So if someone in, you know, Yorkshire says, well, they'll be doing the Lancashire Yorkshire border is exactly the same. Well, as you said, it isn't. And so because they've not lived that, and we're very lucky, I suppose, in England to be closeted and everything to be quite rosy and always to be on the winning side through history, it's meant that we've had the luxury of not being aware of everything. And if you're not interested in watching the news or reading, then you won't be aware of these things. Sorry if that answers the question.
Yeah.
Tristan, can I just jump in here? I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. So Fran Monks has asked if you were starting the project again, and I'm assuming we're still talking about the invisible in between, but I suppose the other one is also relevant. Is there anything that you would do differently?
I think I'd try harder, well, if I could have done, to secure funding. I think one of the problems with not having funding is I had no accountability to anybody but myself, which meant that I could do things that were easier. So it would have been nice to make portraits of people on the border, although at the same time, I feel like that would be asking too much from people, because I am an Englishman dropping in on somebody else's border. And so to ask them to sit and pose just for me and give that time is asking too much. But if I would be able to create workshops, which were part of the plan if I got in my funding applications, so I'd have done some workshops in different areas on the border, that would have been really useful, because I'd have got more of an insight. If I could have worked with more creatives like Jackie, who had that experience of growing up on the border, that would have been, you know, really, really useful. So I think just more research, and if I could have had the idea of, or when the project evolved into the participation of commenting, not just the tearing, if I'd have done that a year earlier, then that would have been, you know, much more helpful than coming in halfway through the project.
Thank you. And I'll just hand over to Nicola.
Hi, Tristan.
Hi, Nicola.
I just popped a question into the chat box, and I'll just read it out briefly to you. It's just really great that you put people and participants' thoughts and feelings at the centre and at the core of this project by inviting them to tear and to write. And that participatory process is continuing. And I just wondered if you've got any plans to revisit the Irish border post-Brexit, to either meet with the same people or new communities, new individuals across the border.
I would love to. Honestly, because I'm very reactive in, I suppose, my personality and the way that I process things, unless somebody commissions me to do it, I can't see me doing it at the moment, because now my focus is, I need to do the Scottish border. But whilst I was talking with Conor O'Callaghan and walking the border with him, he talked about when the border was first drawn out, it was there was a border commission which involved 2 people from the north, 2 people from the south, 2 people from England, who walked the border deciding where it should go. They published a report which was leaked, and then it never happened. That's a very quick overview, but, and one that I'm not going to stick to because I'm sure it's not 100% accurate, but that's the gist of it. And he suggested that it would be quite interesting to do a creative border commission where you'd have a photographer, a poet, and re-walking that border, I suppose. And it's coming up to, I think, the 100-year anniversary of when the border was, that border commission happened. So for me, that would be it'd be fantastic to be involved in that. But I don't think I've got the willpower to make that happen, unless somebody wants to commission me, which would then give me the accountability and give me the incentive to do it. I'd love to do it, but being realistic, which I have to be, I don't think it's something that I'd be able to engineer myself.
Hello.
I also think that that having that participatory element as well in your portraits of employees at Amazon, just seeing that thread go through into your work, and I just wonder if that is something that you'll now continue to go back to, following these 2 really significant bodies of work.
I think it's something which I never expected to be doing. But for me, it allows people to have a voice that wouldn't necessarily have a voice. And especially with the works at Amazon, you see, or I see people commenting on social media about Amazon, saying how terrible it is, this, that, and the other. And it might be, but then it makes me question, in the same way that people that live on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border say, oh, we live on a border, it's not, it's just the same as the Irish border or the Scottish border. It isn't. They don't know. They've not been there. So many people comment about something which they have no experience of, no first-hand knowledge. And so even for me, working in Amazon just for 3 or 4 months, 5 months, it was quite disheartening and negative to feel people were talking badly about, okay, it's a huge company which earns billions of pounds, and I'm sure they're awful in some places, but for me they were fantastic and got me out of a hole. There was 5 months where I had no work, and they paid me really well. They gave me bonuses. It was a pleasure, not necessarily a pleasure to work there, because it was still work and it wasn't photography, but it gave so many people from different walks of life. I've never been in such a diverse atmosphere. And so all these people which have had a lot of them have had pretty crap experiences of the pandemic, COVID, everything else, were being supported by this company. And yes, they were getting something out of it. But then to have the media and random people be negative about it, it was it's not a very nice feeling. And so when people then are saying, or people will then say, oh, well, did Amazon vet the things that they're saying? Were people under pressure not to write this? Well, no, people loved working there because they got paid really well. And it was, and the conditions were great. So I think sorry, I've gone off on one, I know. But the participatory element and allowing people this voice, which is different from Boris Johnson or David Cameron, or from what the idiot who edits the newspaper's saying, or Joe Blogs on Instagram. It allows people to say something, and you can't take away that, you can't edit it. This is what that person said, and some of them aren't interested, they are bored of Brexit, or they just want the extra cash. But then other people have got real things that they want to say and feel it's a valuable way to say them.
Can I just go back to, there's a question there going back to the invisible in between, Sinead O'Neill Nicol wanted to ask. She asks, have you encountered any direct negativity or aggression towards you when gaining responses or discussing the border in the north she's talking about? I'm interested because there are many topics which are off topic when you grow up in the north of Ireland. So I think that's an interesting one to see what kind of conflicting views, any kind of tension.
Yeah, there was one time when myself and Connor were on a hillside above Jonesborough, and two guys, really big guys, came flying across a field in a 4x4 wanting to know what we were doing. And Connor had the gift of the gab. He chatted to them and everything was fine. And once I parked my van I was staying in somewhere I shouldn't have, and armed police woke me up and wanted to know who I was and why I was there. But generally, as soon as people heard my English accent, they were quite disappointed, because unless you live on the border or you're Irish, you'll know. But people like to, or I feel that on the border, people like to play a game where you tell them your name and they try and work out who you are, what type of Irish person you are, what your background is, what school you went to. And with me, they couldn't do any of that, because I'm just English and I don't have any English relatives or Irish relatives. So I think people were mostly disappointed. And after the guys came across the field in the 4x4, I started wearing a high-vis jacket everywhere I went. So I was sort of like shouting, I'm here. So I think once I was taking pictures of houses, because there's all these huge mansions that appear on the border. And so someone didn't like that, and so I had to explain, look, I'm sorry, I'm just doing this project. But one thing I think that I've not really covered is that the border is, because of it's a border, there's so much criminality that happens there. And Jackie showed me places where there was illegal dredging. I know there's things like the diesel dumping which happens, and all of this stuff which made the border for me a lot more, I suppose I felt more tense and insecure about it, but the actual people themselves couldn't be lovelier. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I suppose maybe I wonder if part of the Sinead's question is also about in terms of the responses, did you feel like maybe did the people that you were asking for responses from think you had an agenda in terms of like your opinion about Brexit and the problems with the border, the idea of a hard border?
People would try and engage me on it, but I play devil's advocate. I think being one of three brothers, I'm quite good at sitting on the fence or playing for the other side. Occasionally there was once a heated conversation, but that was between other people within the cafe that were doing it, and I was just sitting back, and people would get obviously very enthusiastic about it, but for me, I would just make it very clear that I was there to find out about it because I'm English and no one tells us anything what's happening in England. I had to come and find out for myself, and people took that at face value, I think. I'm not the brightest, sharpest tool in the box, so it wasn't difficult to pass off as that.
Now, Rebecca, do you want to say anything else about that?
Well, yeah, I was just, I suppose it's kind of following on from what a few people have picked up on, and what Nicol was talking about. And when I asked people in the chat if they could just talk about how they felt about the tearing, not how they felt about Brexit, which was what you were kind of asking them. So sorry for that little subversion there, but what people were kind of saying is, you know, like they had a very emotive response to it. Some people used words like empowering. And I think with participatory artwork, that is a huge element of it, is, as you mentioned before, is that you're giving a voice to people, and you're empowering people to say how they're experiencing things. And I noticed when you were on the, you did a takeover of Instagram, of Grain's Instagram, and you were showing the images of the masks, which kind of started a really interesting conversation about the use of PPE, and also you had included your children in those staged photographs. Just because we haven't really talked too much about it, could you just talk a wee bit more about those performative portraits, and what they're about, and a bit more about the actual masks? Were they the actual masks, and like, how do you feel about that whole thing? Were they other masks, or with, you know? Yeah, can you talk a wee bit more about those series?
So the pictures are, the first one was myself wearing 64 masks, one for each day that I worked at Amazon, and they were masks that I'd used at Amazon. And they were ones, I think you can see on the front one that there's dirt on there. For me, the only way they were contaminated, I suppose, is from my own breath on them, and then they'd been stored at home in a cloth bag. So when it came to, I suppose, the risk with this PPE, it hadn't been in any hazardous environments, it'd just been on my face. So obviously for myself, I didn't feel there was any risk. When it came to my children and involving them, for me, it was really important to involve them, because they were involved. The whole project was about the pandemic, and it was about my experience of going out of my comfort zone, working in this organization, working nights during that period, and my reflection on that. And the children were huge within my decisions of taking that work, the whole pandemic, childcare, everything surrounding it. And the emotions I felt, they were at the core of that. So when my 5-year-old wanted to participate, I thought, one, it's a bit of fun initially for her. I didn't think that I'd end up using them in the project. So when I did it with them, it was the same mask that I'd worn at Amazon, that I'd had on my face, you know, the week before. As a father, I didn't feel that there was any risk, because they hadn't been anywhere other than on my face, and she's always flipping blowing raspberries on me and everything else, so nothing else could have gone there that she wouldn't have been exposed to before. I was conscious of how I put them on her. So when I started putting the mask on her, she wore safety specs, and I put them all around her head everywhere, apart from over her eyes and over her mouth. And then just before I was going to take the last picture, or take the picture even, I said, right, I'm going to put it over your eyes now, are you ready? And she'd say, okay, Daddy, and put a thumbs up. And then said, right, I'm going to put the one over your mouth. And it was, again, just one normal mask on her mouth. And so I'd say, are you ready? And she said, okay, Daddy, thumbs up. And then I'd take the picture, and then we'd take those masks off. And I had different coloured masks, because sometimes at Amazon would get given different colour masks. And so then she then said, I want to do one with the pink mask now, Daddy. I want to do one with the green mask. And so we go through exactly the same process. I'd put it over her eyes, and she's like, everything looks pink. And again, we're doing it in the garage that I'm sitting in now / office. And it was that same setup. So once, and she really enjoyed that daddy-daughter time of her helping me with my work, I suppose. So once I'd done that, I thought it would be nice to do the whole family. My wife still hasn't participated because she's a miserable git. But I wanted to do my son. And again, he's 13 months. So I decided I'd get a teddy with a similar shaped head to him. that's a bit tricky, and photograph that. And then I decided I'd photograph my son in exactly the same spot, swap him out for the teddy. And I did put a mask on him once just to see what he'd do. That's not been used in any of the pictures or in any of the work. He quite enjoyed having a mask on him because he sees mummy and daddy have them all the time and pulling them off. And so there are some pictures where with my daughter you can actually see her eyes, which is a true picture. And then there's one with my son where you can see his eyes, which is it's a layered image. So I just photoshopped that in. And the reasoning for doing that really is, I suppose, one, to court controversy, because I knew there'd be a reaction to it. Part of my ADHD, I thrive on negative and positive reactions. I'm afraid it's part of my neurological whatever. So it's, for me, children are emotive, and more so people don't use children in photography, and I understand why that is. But at the same time, I think it's a shame that we won't see the same pictures, or I won't have the same pictures of my children that my parents had of me, because there's those connotations of getting your camera out in the park or on the beach or taking pictures of your children in the bath, which are totally innocuous. But as a father now, if my little girl's running around the house naked and I've got a camera out, I automatically think, oh, I can't take that picture because she's a small girl, she's naked. If anyone sees it or it gets shared or whatever else, it starts asking all these questions. So, and obviously I wasn't taking that type of picture, but as soon as I think about involving my children either in my contemporary work like this, or even just putting them on social media, I start asking questions. So I had thought about it, and also I'd shown the work in a portfolio review to Anna Sparnham, and she'd raised these same questions and said, I'd really probably advise against using them because of the kickback you may get and everything else. And I understood that and really respect the decision, but there's that little part of me that just wants to push people's buttons at the same time and I think it's important for me to represent my children in that part of the project because of how important they were in the making of it and that stage of my life, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like as you say, it was your daughter who came to you and with the idea, and as you say, it started off as not being something that was part of the project, and I mean that's how creativity works as well. That like it so happens you have a conversation with somebody, and then that conversation leads to something else, and throughout this chat as well there's loads of different people who've brought up things. Oh, there's a competition here and there's a project here, and we'll save that for you because I'm just aware of the time as well. And I wanted to just open it up to anybody else if they wanted to if you want to raise your hand, if you want to ask a question, or kind of continue.
I mean, I just wanted to say that I think, as you say, Rebecca, there's a lot of interesting links there in the chat box from various Neil Malloy, Malcolm Dixon, about projects that relate to the subject that Tristan's dealing with, and I would really encourage people to follow up those links, because and Geraldine Timlin's posted a few links as well, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that's coming about because of Tristan's project. And that whole subject that started you open up there as well, it's a whole other thing I never even thought about talking about tonight, was that whole thing about creativity and censorship and how to tell the truth of your life and everything that's been going on the past few years with all that. And in photography, it's a very pertinent thing, because there's so many artists using photography, people like Sally Mann, that are seen as contentious. But as you say, Tristan, what they're trying to do, like how do you make a true document if you're not allowed to make a true document because everything's been kind of made into some sort of evil thing, or some sort of perverse thing, when it's not. It's a whole new subject. It's a whole big subject to be talked about there, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway. That's too much.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate. I really like that you involved your family in this, and I think there's a lot of you know, like it's only recently that artists are kind of allowed to be parents, you know, like and kind of like involve their family in what it is they're doing. There's often like a kind of separation that, you know, the artist is way over here, and then ordinary life is somewhere else. But you know, like we're living through these times, and as you say, the decisions that you made around everything they're doing is based on your children, and they're very much part of this, and they can't document this for themselves, but obviously your daughter is very aware of what's going on and wants to explore it, and as you say, sees these masks on you and wants to respond to it. So I think like yeah, I think as an artist, I think it's important that you respond to that as well, and present it, and open up that conversation. What is appropriate, and what you know, yeah, like, yeah, lots of things to ask. Yeah, I don't even know what time it is because I've got my thing on full screen. I am just going to check the chat box to see if we've got some more questions. Yeah, lots of people with gratitude and thanks. A lot of people have had to leave. Oh, I see, it's 8:20. We've chatted quite a bit. Come here, I just want to really thank everybody who turned up this evening. I really want to thank Grain for supporting us with this. And also, well, mainly Tristan really for the project and for working with us. The exhibition is up at Fort Dunree at the moment. The plan is to have it there till the 15th of January. At the moment, they're talking about galleries being closed, but it's being reviewed. So we'll just kind of you know, play it by ear as to how that goes. The people who didn't get the packs are all the people in the Republic of Ireland. So the divide was clear there on the Zoom. Everyone who wasn't tearing was in the Republic. So you will get your pack soon, and so will the rest of you. And please do participate. And those of you who did participate, I know it's a really busy time, but do drop that in the post box and do be part of this this wider project. Yeah, Martha, the last word I'm leaving to you. No, the last word I'm leaving to Nicola.
Nicola, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and it's wonderful that people were able to organize this event and to take part during this time, and really important, I think, that it happened during this time. I feel like we're on the eve of, you know, a significant change. Thanks, Tristan. Thank you to everybody at ArtLink, and yeah, wishing everybody a happy new year, really.
Yeah.
Let's hope 2021 is a good one.
Yeah, keep in touch, everyone, and yeah, we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, thanks all for joining. Thanks a million, Tristan, for joining.
Thanks, Tristan. Thanks, Rebecca and Martha.
Thank you very much to everyone who's attended.
Thanks a million, Jackie, for your input as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.